Hey Musa, how are you doing?
I'm okay. How you doing, Jonathan, this week?
I'm all right. I've been keeping fit and healthy and getting odd jobs done, and it's been quite nice. I've sacked Alexa.
Have you?
I fired Alexa. I tell you what, I'm so much better for it. No, I just listen to the radio and have to put up. I mean, that's the thing with the radio. You have to put up with stuff you don't really want to listen
Mm.
to,
There
but
was
that's
a
quite
time.
nice.
There was a time, Jonathan, when I wanted to find out about something. I would, I'd go open an encyclopedia and then try and find relevant books about it. Now with Wikipedia and all of this, I think we've kind of shortcut our way to knowledge, isn't it? And convenience. And I'm just wondering if we've done ourselves favors by that. My son, I've told you, he's 14. He doesn't read anymore. I mean, he thinks he reads a lot. He's reading To Kill a Mockingbird at the moment, and but this has been after me basically begging him to pick something up to read. I just wonder if the digital revolution has caused us more problems than answers.
But I think it's changed how we interact with information, how we produce information, and what we consider to be valid information, and how we assess the strength of its validity. So it's doing all that. Whereas before it used to be an encyclopedia. The encyclopedia had its own methods of verification, and we'd trust that. But now it's harder to tell. So we're working off instincts, which perhaps just validate our own biases. But you're a scientist. Tell me what you think. I mean, do you see? I remember when I did this course on research methods, and there was a guy. It always left an impression with me. He was teaching. He said, "You read in the newspaper. It says research says," and I always think this was him talking. He said, "I always think, well, what was the research? How did they go about it? How many people were in the research? What were the methods they used? What were the problems with the research? Because research has..." And he started stringing out all these questions. And I've never looked at that phrase again the same. I've gone, I wonder what it really did say. But do you get that? Because I know you're a scientist, and do you end up looking at news stories or anything and do you think, I don't know what that's about?
I'm going to take you up on the fact that I'm a scientist because maybe technically I am. Well, I am, but then there's a whole question about what that means. But let's put that to a side for a second, and the story that I've been interested in and thinking about, and I really want to unpack actually, is about President Trump's announcement that there is a causal association between paracetamol and autism in offspring. So pregnant ladies should try and avoid paracetamol, which has gone down like a lead balloon in kind of medical circles around the world. I think in America as well, although they've had to be a bit more circumspect about it. And here, our kind of scientists and researchers and the authorities that we trust have been saying that, well, in polite terms, that don't listen to this. It's a whole load of nonsense, right? And when I hear this, I'm always really, really interested to understand exactly what is going on and how we come to an understanding of medical science. I don't know. Have you come across this story?
I've come across this story.
Sure.
I mean, so when was it? The beginning of October 2025, something comes out, and they find a causal link, or they claim to have found a causal link between the paracetamol taken by pregnant women and autism.
Yeah.
I mean, I looked at that and I thought, and then I saw the medical establishment fight back against that. I thought, well, hang on, why don't we just ask the questions? Why don't we ask all the questions that need asking?
Okay.
Because I then wrote down a list of all the questions I'd ask, and it's quite a long list.
Is it?
Okay. I'll take you through it later. But Tell me, what do you see?
So I think if you were to follow traditional media outlets, conventional media, right? What you would find is that this is not what the medical bodies say. This is not what the science says. I actually happen to agree with that. I've had a brief look at some of the evidence underlying this, um, and so and there isn't really evidence of an association. I'll give you an example. Um, there's a very large study done in Sweden last year. I think 2.5 million people over. I think over at least 15 years, I believe. Don't quote me on that. Of data looking at about 2.5 million pregnancies and exposure to paracetamol. And what they found actually is really fascinating stuff. So when you run the analysis, these studies are really important from Sweden, Scandinavian countries, because they're population-based studies, right? Because they just have such an excellent way of collecting whole patient data across the population. So when you run the analysis, you do actually find what is called a dose dependent response between the amount of paracetamol that a child has been exposed to and all kinds of neurodevelopmental issues such as autism, ADHD, etc., etc. But
Just
yeah,
hold on. What's dose dependent
so
response
so
mean?
so the more paracetamol you've taken, the more likely your child is to develop one of these neurodevelopmental conditions.
Okay, so
ADHD,
this wasn't
autism,
totally crazy. There's been a big study, a lot of people. How many people again?
2.5 million.
2.5 million people, and it's saying there is some form of significant statistical correlation between the amount of paracetamol you take and development issues in a newborn child.
Yeah, absolutely. But and this bit is crucial. When you add what are called you adjust for confounders, so things that the original analysis might not have taken into account, and particularly when you add what is called sibling analysis into the model, so you're looking at shared genetics and all of these kind of things, that association basically goes away completely, goes to complete zero. So
So,
yeah.
so what are confounders? What is a confounder in this?
So I suppose, okay, so science is the association between A and B or X and Y, essentially, right? Um, that's not the only type of science, but let's just talk about quantitative types of science. We're looking for how one thing affects the other, how height might be associated with weight, how age might be associated with cognitive ability, how heart fitness is associated with how fast you can run. That's basically associations between what are called two variables, right? In those in that association, there may be all kind of other third ways that one may affect the other. So, for example, let's think about autism and paracetamol. Um, well, people who take paracetamol will likely to have fevers and likely to be more ill, right? And therefore, it might be the fever that is causing the autism. I'm not saying that necessarily is, although there is some evidence that uh, birth or gestational, um, what I would say, insults during pregnancy or bad events, during pregnancy have an effect on baby's brain later life development. But it might be nothing to do with the paracetamol. It might be to do with the fever, right? And so if you're looking between the paracetamol and the autism, so your exposure and your outcome, and there's something that comes in between, that's a confounder. Does that make sense? You have to adjust for that
So
through
what you're,
various mechanisms. Yeah,
and this is one of my problems with it. I think, okay, the thing is, the use of paracetamol is widespread.
sure.
It's hugely widespread, and it's been widespread after it gets released into the general public around the 1950s. It's discovered many years before,
Mm,
but it doesn't become used. So it becomes widespread. But that means it's a factor amongst many other widespread factors. So we have an increase in fats. We have an increase in sugars since the 1950s. There's a whole lot of other questions I could ask, but I can see in terms of, have you got another tab open? I'm getting an echo. Sorry, Musa.
A tab. I've only got the. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm getting an echo of myself. You've only got the one window open.
Yeah, I don't have anything else open.
Okay. So that's okay. I mean, what can
you
we
want
do?
to just continue? Yeah, okay.
I think we just continue. I just can hear myself talking.
Okay.
So look, here's the thing. If there's all these other factors, and there must be loads of factors. You've got the rise of fuels in the air. You've got changes into the stuff we have in the water. You've got increased in screen times. All of this has happened as well. So there's probably thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of other factors which are widespread at the same time as paracetamol is widespread. How did the study deal with those who didn't take paracetamol? How did it, and how much of a difference was there?
So, I can't remember all of the study results off the top of my head. I had more than a passing glance at it, right? But essentially what it did is it set up 4 different models. And in these models, it looked at all these different types of confounders. And, Model 4 had God knows how many confounders, including the sibling analysis. They looked at, smoking status, alcohol status. They looked at, socioeconomic class. They looked at parental diagnosis. They looked at multiple things, right? And you could easily see that as you adjusted for more and more confounders, in this case, the association was going down. Now, the problem is, Jonathan, that we don't know all of the things, as you've just suggested. We don't know all of the things that might confound any association. And that's the problem with these types of studies. So although these studies I've told you about, population, natural, longitudinal studies, they're really nicely designed, we can't really, it's very difficult to make causal interpretations from them, at least in medical science. So we do use some of these types of studies, observational studies in economic science, but in medical science, this is not the gold standard. We use something called randomized clinical trials, which is seen as the top of the pyramid, the best of the best, as it were.
So how do you normally, in your field, how do you deal with this sort of data coming in? What's the next stage that normally happens rather than a public announcement?
So I don't know. Have you heard of a field called evidence-based medicine? It's a kind of buzzword. Lots of people
take me through it.
Yeah. Okay. So in, I think, around 1992, there was I think it was McMaster University in Canada, and some of the clinicians and scientists there were thinking about, there's so much data that's being published. How do we kind of order it all and get a hierarchy and know exactly what to do? Because there's too many studies. Even if I look up, my particular interest was cannabis and psychosis. Even if I look that up in one of the medical databases, okay, hundreds, maybe thousands of studies on these kind of associations. And so they developed evidence-based medicine, which was a kind of set of rules and ways to begin to think and evaluate about the evidence. And it all makes sense. I mean, at the top of, the best kind of quality of evidence is what's called meta-analysis data, which is where you're pooling lots of different studies, you're often using, reasonably complex statistical analysis to find out that if your drug, for example, is better than placebo in, I don't know, treating depression or treating heart attacks and these kind of things. And then underneath that, you've got randomized clinical trials. So often many randomized clinical trials will go into a meta-analysis. There's certain ways to do randomized clinical trials. People will have heard of that name or that tag before, RCT. But, they have to be what's called double-blinded, which means both the person who's taking the drug and the person who's measuring doesn't know whether, for example, the patient is actually taking the active drug or the placebo. And then underneath that, there's all kinds of other, there's observational studies and so on and so forth, at the bottom of which is expert opinion, right? So,
and where did this study of 2 million people 2.5 million people in Sweden, that's a lot of people actually, where in a small country, that's probably half of them, where does that fit in the hierarchy of evidence?
So it's not a randomized controlled trial, right?
Okay.
It's very difficult to do randomized controlled trials on this particular question. There's ethical complications. Suppose you have a drug which you think might cause complications, right, in pregnancy. How do you give that drug to some women randomly and give placebo to some other women randomly and measure for the adverse outcome of interest? Does that make sense? It's just not ethical,
okay.
right?
So you're not answering my question. I want to know.
Yeah.
Where does this? What normally happens? Let's say I've got something on heart attacks. Let's move out the autism thing. Let's say I've got something on heart attacks, and someone says we've got a study from Norway, and we've studied people, and we think there might be a link here. This is the study. Do we then announce it by government, or do we then test it within? How does that work? What happens? What's the normal thing?
You have to have multiple converging lines of evidence, and you have to have all the different studies examined, or what is called critically appraised, by a process, and often by a panel that will look at this, right?
That sounds like it's a closed shop. That sounds like behind closed doors we decide if you're going to hear it or not. That feeds into all my suspicions about it's a stitch up. So
sure.
Is that?
So there are transparent mechanisms by which there are critical appraisal checklists. There are things that you should be looking for in each study. There are rating scores and instruments and all of these things. You should appraise things thoroughly. If you look at in the UK, for example, we have a body called the National Institute of Clinical Excellence that issues guidelines for any medical condition. You might have heard of that.
The NICE guidelines, I presume.
That's right. They're the NICE guidelines, right? And if you look at their guidelines, you can go on their website and click on the links. They will often have 200-300 pages of evidence behind what they are suggesting. And so it should be, of course, done in a transparent process. What you're saying, Jonathan, however, I mean, to a certain extent, to a certain extent, it depends on the people scoring, the exact methods of analysis that you use. There is a difference depending on these things. Yeah.
Here's my understanding of science.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back a bit in time.
Yeah.
You boil water. You discover it boils at 100 points on this scale, because I built a thermometer, and at 100 it boils. So I say water boils at 100 degrees. That doesn't mean anything in itself. What I need to do is for people around the world to follow my method of boiling water and to follow my method of building a thermometer and to get the same results. And of course they don't, because we find up a mountain, it boils lower because there's not so much air pressure and it comes to a boil earlier. So now we realize at sea level, it boils at 100 degrees. At 5,000 meters, it boils at a bit less. And that's science. That's as I understand it. It requires corroboration. But what I found interesting about this case is there was some study, and maybe the study, because everyone's trying to get funding, so people publicize results. But there's a study, and it's picked up on. One study is picked up on. But I thought the whole thing was one study is not sufficient to shift opinion.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the study I was citing was, I'm citing that, saying that this goes against President Trump's opinion, and I don't know which studies he used to formulate his particular opinion, but the overwhelming evidence.
Stop. I thought the study from Sweden confirmed his opinion.
Well, it begins to suggest this when you don't look at the confounders. But when you do the proper methods and you look at the confounders and you do the proper statistical analysis in that particular study, you find it doesn't exist.
So are you saying that when they publish the study, they also publish that there's these confounders too, and they publish the data?
Absolutely. It was a very rigorous study. But I believe this is not the only study which has shown that in unadjusted analysis, this association exists. But
what's unadjusted analysis? That's the trouble. It's all this other language.
Absolutely. So unadjusted is when you just look at the simple fact of the doses of paracetamol taken and the exposure of autism.
I'm going to give you an example of this. As I probably told you before, my father was a medical statistician.
Oh, of course.
And he said the reason there are medical statisticians is because doctors can't do statistics, but doctors think they can do statistics.
Mm-hmm.
But statistics is a skilled area. It's like there's people who can mend cars, and there's people who can mend Formula One cars. There's slightly different skills, yeah. So here's his example that he used to give. It's there's a guy, and he's running a flea circus, and he says to everyone, "The flea's ears are in its legs." And they say, "No, I don't think the flea's ears are in its legs." He says, "No, I have absolute proof that the ears of a flea are in the legs." And they say, "Prove it." And he says, "Okay." And he says, "I've taught these fleas to jump on command." And he says, the fleas are all sitting there in the flea circus, and he says, "Jump," and all the fleas jump. And he says, "I'll show you. It works for real. Jump," and they jump again. He says, "Okay. Now I'm going to pull the legs off each of these fleas. Now watch." He says, "Jump," and they don't have any legs, so they don't jump. He says, "You see, they can't hear anymore." In other words, what looks like proof isn't necessarily proof by a long, long way. The method of inquiry is very important. The analytics is very important. But that's what you're saying is this study says, look, this isn't necessarily causal. There's a difference between causal and correlation.
That's right. Absolutely.
So
I think that there's not evidence, right? Essentially, from the medical bodies who have looked at this, from the kind of totality of studies, that there is an association between these two things. But what I find really interesting, and what I want to unpack a little bit, is how do we get to this view of the science? Because I accept conventional medical logic here, right? I've looked at the studies myself. I've found that there's no evidence for them.
For what?
For the association between paracetamol and in pregnancy and autism. But if you remember a few years ago, COVID was going on, and we were all saying things like, "We must follow the science. We must follow the science." Then it turned out, if you remember, that there wasn't one science. There were lots of different scientists debating. What were the origins of COVID? Where did it come from? Did it come from a market in Wuhan? Was there a lab leak? What was the best way to deal with it? Should we all shut down? Should we go about as normal? Will we develop herd immunity? All of these kind of things. These were, minute to minute or day to day, at least, decisions that were having to be made. And it seemed, for that moment that and I was just coming out of PhD at this time, right? That it was really putting a magnifying glass on what the science is, and that there is no single science, because all these very eminent scientists were all arguing with each other, and
But here lies the thing. So we've developed a society since the Enlightenment that goes down a particular form of logic, and it follows that logical thing, and it creates objects and technologies and of these observations and of adapting to these understandings, manipulating the world in order to follow these things. When I say the world, the material world. Now, that's going on. But at the same time, now we're starting to see that science is more of a debate. Of course, it's a debate. And we can also see, because if we look at the history of science, we'll find it changes its mind occasionally. It has a sort of broad consensus, always has a broad sort of consensus, not an absolute consensus, maybe on a few things, but a broad consensus, or everyone's sort of pretty much going in one direction, but there's variations on it. And we're looking at those variations. And we're the armchair detectives of today. We're watching true crime. We're doing all that, and we're doing our own research. And we're going, this doesn't quite make sense. And when an issue like a pandemic comes, well, it lands in the conditions of the time, and the conditions of the time are enormous corruption, power plays, and enormous distrust by certain people, and an awful lot of incredible trust by others. And we end up with a situation of outbreak and public order and disciplining, which has its own history, back to the leper colony, back to the writings of Foucault. But what this means is science itself starts to be questioned. But the question is, it's not the scientists questioning it, or maybe one or two, some doctor out in Paris or some, these isolated figures, but they were always there. We always have the isolated figures who say, I've got the truth. That's fine. They're part of it, but you've got to go with the broad consensus. They might be proved right in 60 years, but that's how it works. And they're most often not. They're not proved right, and they're just bitter and resentful. So you've got that going on. But what's going on now is you've got public debate about what is science without scientific knowledge themselves, or basic scientific knowledge, or someone who's read something on it. And this, I tell you the analogy it reminds me of.
Yeah.
Let's say your car's broken down, and the engine's ticking over, it's making a bit of a noise, and the mechanic's in there, and they're sitting there, and the mechanic's looking at it, and they're going, oh, hang on. And the thing the mechanic really hates, generally, is someone from the public whose car it is telling them what to do. They're going, well, have you tried this? It really does annoy the mechanic. Now, if there was another mechanic there, they might be having a conversation. If there were a few mechanics. But imagine you invite everyone over to listen to the engine and have a chat about it while they're trying to work it out. It's impossible. And I think that's what we've got to. Once studies flip it into the social media conversation. The point with science is it works because there's a qualification to be able to do it. There's a certain level of language. Now, once you have that qualification, fine, join the debate. But understand how you look at the evidence. I don't know how to look at the evidence. I don't have those quantitative skills. You do. I'll let you look at the evidence and I'll hear you. And you don't even think you do, but you've got more than most.
Jonathan, you see, that's an alluring argument. I agree with it to a certain extent. So you need to have qualified people, right, who can tell you what the truth is. In fact, Jonathan, I don't know if you're aware of this, right? Muslim scholars have exactly the same debate about Islam, and I'm sure all other religions do. Do you need a kind of clergy? Do you need a scholar to be able to tell you what the truth is, what this means? Are you good enough to read the Quran and interpret it and tell us its meanings, or decide for yourself what it means? Or do you need somebody who's qualified, who's gone through the proper process to do it? It's the same with science.
Is it?
Yeah, it's exactly the same.
Why? Why is that?
Because
I think
what it does. What it does. I'm saying this as somebody who's done a PhD and sat with the top scientists and all of these things, the top professors. What it does is it creates a priesthood, and that priesthood of scientists is dangerous, and that's what actually came crashing down in COVID. There were problems with the conventional science. We came to that very, very quickly,
right?
And and so the question of how to solve this riddle or this problem, or how to get to the true approximation of science, or what we should have been doing, whether we should have been having vaccines or not, whether we should have been giving them to all age groups or not. These became very difficult questions.
Yeah, I don't know. I see you end up with your priesthood very quickly, and you do.
And we have that. We have conventionally codified a priesthood of scientists that we will go to as a public. That if a certain problem comes up in a certain area, the newspapers will call a certain person. You
Yeah.
know,
And those
yeah,
who communicate well and are linked into the establishments of communication,
yeah,
whatever that is, it might just be
absolutely.
a particular podcast or something. But if those who are linked into that will get heard, the question is where, and this comes back to it. Should someone who can't read the Quran because they are unable to read then tell you what's inside it? Let's say I do an O level in Arabic.
Yeah.
And I say I'm going to read the Quran in its original, and I'll tell you exactly what it says with my O level in Arabic. I mean, I've never read it. Tell me, do you think I could get away with that, or would it be a bit too tricky?
I think the thing is, Jonathan, that, and I would say this in both religion and science, is that it's important for us to develop that humility to be able to understand people's point of view. I would say this in medicine as well. So I have conversations about quite high order scientific concepts with my patients all the time, right? If I had the view of I am the expert, you are not. I'm saying this to my patients. You're worried about, I don't know, sexual side effects of SSRIs or these kind of things, but all of my science says it's not a problem. These will go away, and we need to treat your depression effectively. Then I'm not really listening to you, am I? And I'm not thinking broadly enough about the whole conversation. So I think the person with an O level in Arabic may have ideas about the Quran. They might need to have some guidance to put that into context. But I certainly don't think that you should just poo-poo them and say, well, there's nothing here. There's nothing to be seen here. And this is when science or faith or medicine goes wrong.
Okay, no, I totally agree. You've got to communicate it, but that gets that needs to be done, and it isn't. And I agree, and I like your approach. You say with your patients, where your job is to bridge the gap. But what happens then when you have a major politician say, "Well, this is how it is. I have spoken. This is how it is," and at that point, then what do you do with the public? Then what? How do you then go about explaining? Well, this is how you do research, and this is what the research says. How do you do that when someone steps in because it's newsworthy and distracts from other news?
Well, the problem here is about the authoritativeness of conversation, isn't it? And if you have a powerful politician giving a governmental politician, giving his view according to and professing to talk on account of or for all these important government bodies who have done all this work, right? Then that increases your level of authority and it increases your level of trust in that. But the problem is that there's an interaction between trust and reality, and if things are not good, messages are not going out which are basically truthful and are giving us the clear picture, that trust will quickly disintegrate. And therefore, we won't be trusting either the politicians or those medical bodies anymore. And therefore, there's a constant effort in terms of public policy and particularly public health to give accurate, meaningful patient messaging.
So I think something else is missing. I think people don't. I'll come to it, but I think it's to do with how people understand what research is. But before I do that, there's part of this story was the ever in the news face of Nigel Farage, who is accused of creating dog whistles, but of course is a huge responder to his own master's whistling, and his
can I just digress for a moment?
Yeah.
How many seats does Reform have in Parliament?
I know. It's about 5 or something.
How many do the Liberal Democrats have?
I know it's 70. But the point is, and Ed Davey might go water skiing tomorrow, but it's not the same.
Sure.
So look, here's the thing, and it's also to do with public opinion. So here's the thing. But what he said, and don't forget, he's responding to other whistles. What he said is science constantly changes. We can't really trust the experts because these experts will be proved wrong in time. I mean, it might take 300 years for them to be proved wrong. It might take 300 days. Science will move. But, Newton's still quite useful. It got people to the moon. It wasn't absolutely accurate, but it got people to the moon, which isn't bad. You can do stuff with science. But his thing was, don't trust them. Trust me. I'm not a scientist. My training was in financial investment. But this is the point. The political thing of sowing distrust against a drug of mass use is very important. So I'll get to the questions which I think comes up, but that's what it's all about. It's about don't trust expertise because we're about to enter a totally different field. We're going to shift things radically. And we're not going to have any evidence. A bit like Liz Truss doesn't want to get the budgetary information before she has a budget. She doesn't want to get that research done because it'll prove it's bad to do. So they've got to marginalize those who are about to stand against them. And you do that by picking a drug of mass use, paracetamol, aspirin, something like this, and then you tie it to something else of common occurrence. But it's tricksy. And I think it's because people don't understand research.
Well, I find that fascinating, Jonathan. That's your take on it. And that might be the take for why President Trump had given his view. I don't know. I'm not inside his head.
It was very newsworthy at a time when he was being linked to Epstein, but carry on.
Okay, my view about Mr. Farage is that he finds it very difficult to disagree with President Trump, which Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary of the United Kingdom, to his credit, did not in this very important question. And therefore, he has to spin a line. And I think that's really important in terms of science, scientific messaging, medical messaging, is what is the line? What is the agenda of the person who's talking and who's telling you? And this is why people trust their doctor. Look, when I go and see a patient, all my political views, all my personal views about life, everything I talk to you about goes out of the window because I have to be transparent with all the information that I give. I have to be objective. I have to deliver it in a way that makes it easy for the patient to make decisions. And therefore, I know quite consciously which part of me I am giving up and I'm bringing into that clinical session, right? And that's what you expect for your doctor. You should expect that from every doctor, I think. Right?
But now you're going to be battling someone. The pregnant woman thinking, well, I took, my kid's got this. Was it the paracetamol? And you're going to have to go through this whole thing.
Sure.
And wait for the next one because this is muzzle velocity politics, to use Steve Bannon's words. Another one will come out and another one come out. This is to get us so we can't trust it anymore, and then we can just change it. But I think it requires just two small little things. One is long term, one is very simple.
Sure.
There's the 3 R's in education, which is reading, writing, arithmetic. I know they're not R's, are they? But that's how we refer to them. Reading, writing, arithmetic. But I feel there should be a 4th one, which is called research. I think the whole mess we find ourselves in is because we don't know how to research. Listening to you today, I'm seeing, the very fact that you question the priesthood, you question closed door expert commentary, and you value the bridging of information to people. I think, hang on, if you'd learnt that in the secondary school, you'd approach this all very differently, and you wouldn't put up with people going, the chief medical officer said it. You'd say, well, let's have a look at the evidence, please. Can you make it publicly available? I've been trained to do it. Because in an information age where information is as big as it's ever been in the history of humankind. Research skills are really important. And I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to illustrate this. Because I just thought, I'll sit down, I'll write the questions I want to know about this story. Okay, first of all, when is paracetamol discovered? Okay, that's important. You've got to get the baseline. Okay.
Sure.
And how did its chemical composition or dosage change significantly for anything else that was widely used at the time? Because I've got to see this as a discovery. When was it first prescribed to people? And what was it prescribed for? And was it available globally all at the same instant moment? Or did it take years to become widely available and widely prescribed as a drug in different countries? It can't have been a big bang. It must have gone out. It probably took a few decades. When did it become widely available as over-the-counter medication? I believe it's somewhere in the 1950s, after my father was born, you could have photos of him. Very into maths though. How was it rolled out internationally? How was this over-the-counter stuff rolled out internationally? When's autism first diagnosed, which you're familiar with, and it goes back? How has the diagnosis for autism changed over time? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a whole load of medical conditions where the diagnosis has constantly changed. And the DSM, which is the diagnosis manual for mental health, constantly changes. And did autism always refer to the same thing? And what were those changes? Because now, if we're going to have a correlation, we need to have stability. I mean, there's a point where one of the governments is changing the rules on what an unemployment is so often that I think they made 21 changes in 3 years that the Office of National Statistics complained and said, you're making all historical data meaningless. Anyway, so what are those changes? Why were those changes made? That's hard to find information. Everything else until now has been quite easy to find. Why were they made? Well, that's harder to find. Was the process and system of creating diagnosis, and what does that mean? Well, that's really a big question, isn't it? How do we do diagnosis? But it's an important one, but it's one we don't talk about. So we're happily say, autism. Well, how is it diagnosed? How's heart conditions or kidney conditions? How's mental health? How are these things diagnosed? What's the history of their development? Because if I don't understand that, I don't really understand what's going on. And what is the system of diagnosis of patients generally? How's that changed over time? Do we approach doctors and doctors approach us exactly as they did 100 years ago? Or has it changed? It sounds like it changed a bit from what you're saying. What changes have I seen in my own lifetime? Well, it's a hard question to answer, but very good to think with. How has it changed going to the doctor? How's medication changed going to the doctor? How has the growth of paracetamol use mapped alongside the growth of autism? From birth, a diagnosis of autism in a 30-year-old needs to be mapped against sales of paracetamol in that country of birth 31 years ago. That's very hard to find information. I think that's quite hard, especially a member of the public. I think it's probably quite hard for a professional researcher, but it is the critical question. That would tell us a lot. What other environmental factors have happened other than paracetamol? Increase in sugar, palm oil, other medications, environmental pollutants. There's hundreds of thousands of variables. Have these different styles of have we changed the way we bring up children? Is nurture part of it? Is the way we bring up children part of it? What data have we collected about all the parents of autistic children? Have we got these genetic maps yet? What do we know about the grandparents and the great-grandparents? Because if it's just environmental, they won't be affected. But I'm very aware my pre-paracetamol birth dad was very affected, and I've got 4 sisters. We're all somewhere. Trust me. You can meet us one day. It's a surprise. Okay, how do we see outsiders today? Because, of course, the development thing was about being outsiders, but now they're a bit more included. So we're picking up on variations of it and subtleties of it. What does it mean not to conform? How do you keep your head down today? Because those kids had to keep their head down, or they went off to a special school after smashing it up. What happens when education systems try to help every child achieve their own potential? Well, what they'll notice is that children are different than the broad-based education might have missed. So once we were just trying to teach 30 kids in the year and the best ones did okay, it's fine. Don't have to look at it. But once we start looking at each one, we start seeing a whole load of other signs. What do we do as a society made of patients, carers, institutions, and professionals once a diagnosis is set out? What does diagnosis do to us as a society? I mean, look, those are just first questions, 5 minutes, a bottle of beer questions, yeah? All that. As someone goes, paracetamol, autism, all that is in there. And unless we can answer a lot of that, we don't really understand what the question was in the first place.
So what you're saying, Jonathan, is we need to ask questions about the context in which, science and evidence is presented to us. And we need to have a deep understanding overall about what the exposures are, what the outcomes are, what it means for society. I think you're right. I mean, I think those are excellent questions. Those are exactly the right questions that, I wish. So I am a question writer for the critical appraisal paper for the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And, we often have discussions amongst our panel about, what candidates are bringing to the, training psychiatrists are bringing to the exam, what skills, what questions they're asking. I wish they would all have that kind of inquisitive approach like you. They don't, incidentally. They just want to pass exams. But I think that it's certainly true that we could go to this to the nth level. I think you'll never quite get away from the need for some kind of authority and some kind of expertise. But the danger of expertise, as I've said, and I've seen myself, is priesthood. A priesthood exists in science. Perhaps we won't talk about it today, but I've certainly seen it face to face. What happens?
Let me ask you. You haven't said why that's a problem. I've just assumed. I think I know why it's a problem. Why is the priesthood in science a problem?
So what happens when you have a professor who's made their whole career on studying a particular association? They've written papers and grants. I've seen this many times. They've written papers and grants and won awards for a particular theory of theirs, and then the paper comes out, and and the evidence shows that it doesn't support it. What does that professor do? Does he say, "Okay, that's fine"? It's often a he. It's not always a he. It's often a he. Does he say, "Yeah, that's fine. Look, we should go with the new data. This is so exciting. Everything I was thinking was wrong"? Or does he can the paper? I've seen them can the paper enough times.
What do you mean they suppress it?
Absolutely. What are you?
No, seriously.
Absolutely. There's multiple ways to suppress new findings in science.
How? No.
Yeah,
because I presume science is open.
No. You can be a peer reviewer. You can kill papers. You can be on editorial boards. You can say that this paper is not of interest to our general expertise, or you can refuse to fund the grants. Science is a closed club. It really is a closed club in any particular field. There are ways of shaping the field to meet your own hype. I've certainly seen that enough times in the relatively short scientific career I've had, which is probably a decent level of science. I would say 10, 12 years. Yeah.
So what you're saying is all those who don't trust what the doctors say are right.
I'm saying that you should always ask questions. Always ask the questions. I want my patients to ask me the questions.
But what if they
I will tell you if I don't know.
Okay, what if they're saying, look, is all the data on these drugs made up in order to sell drugs, in order to make profits?
So look, I have absolutely. I have these conversations all the time.
And what do you say?
And I start by talking about randomized control trials. I talk about what we know, what we don't know. Often I might talk about the fact that these trials are for 6 weeks, but I will say that these medications, they seem to work. The evidence shows that they work. I've seen them work. I've seen people in desperate situations where they have worked. But I'm not going to force you to put anything in your body that you don't want to. And I understand the things that you're telling me about. I understand that there are sexual side effects of medication, that there are other problems with medication. And I wouldn't recommend medication if I didn't think that your condition meets a certain level of severity that we need to go down this route now. Now, you can ask me any questions you want. Let's have a discussion. And if you want time to think about it, I'll let you think about it. I mean, I think you have to have these open conversations. You have to have a certain level of humility as a scientist and a doctor. And having been part of both fields, I can tell you that sometimes that is sorely lacking. And I've never come across patients who haven't, appreciated that approach or said, I mean, of course you get some people who say, oh, I don't know, I've got too much information, doctor, you make the decision. But that's very rare, actually. In Britain, that's very rare. I get that sometimes. Yeah.
What do they do?
Well,
so I would presume people do have to just go, well, look, I mean, I do when the builder comes around. He says, how do you want it? I say, I don't know. You tell me what works. Because I don't know. I don't do this.
I think that if I prescribe medication, it's my responsibility to talk to you about the benefits of it, the risks of the side effects of it, the alternatives of it, other ways that we can treat the problem. Those things are basic. And then also to say that, the final decision is up to you. That's just good medicine, and in my view, and actually it's good science as well. And it's extremely important.
Why is it important?
You have to build the trust with your patients or with the public, and by giving authoritarian messages that I don't know. You see, I might prescribe a patient of mine a common medication that I've seen work hundreds of times before, such as fluoxetine, which is also known as Prozac. It might not work in this patient. I've got to see the patient next time, and I've got to accept it hasn't worked. So why would I ever oversell it? I will always say that, look, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. And the fact is that all our science, all of our clinical trials are about other people. They're actually also about generally what are called averaged results. So we look at something called the mean and the standard deviation. You might know much more about this than I do, Jonathan.
No, I
right?
mean, it's interesting. Yeah. It's an interesting drug you chose for that thing. So
yeah,
if
I can't say.
If I'm not mistaken, that drug, otherwise known as Prozac, is controversial. If I'm not mistaken, I seem to remember reading something that they had suppressed some of the information about adverse effects on people who were younger, and that those people had quite strong, damaging reactions to it, and they kept that down. And I happen to know someone who had an appallingly strong, damaging reaction to it, such that they're no longer here. It made things worse. Now,
so that's
how am I meant to trust? How am I meant to trust this company?
That's a great example, actually. So I can't remember if it was fluoxetine, although I think it might have been. But SSRIs were found to have an association in younger people with suicidal ideation, right? Yeah. And so this takes 30 seconds to discuss. I always say this to especially people who are younger than 24, but I'll say it to people who are trying medication for the first time anyway. I will say that sometimes these medications, I see them as fine-tuning the brain rather than correcting a chemical deficit. For that reason, sometimes the anxiety can get a bit worse before it gets better. In younger people, there has been an association, it's rare, but statistically significant, that was found between suicidal thoughts and this medication. Now, that's a difficult relationship to tease out because we're often giving these medications to people with depression. But I should tell you about it. I should make you aware of it. If you have those thoughts, don't worry about it. Please let us know, either me or your GP, and we can swap the medication. We can stop it. We can change it. There's plenty of other alternatives. Why is that not? You have to take the patients alongside with you about the science, what you know and what you don't know.
So, firstly,
Yeah.
was the company that has made gazillions from this aware of that when they released their drug? And if they weren't aware of the effect on young people, why was it given permission to be prescribed to young people?
Well, so I don't know the exact. I can't remember the whole story of this particular association. What I can say is that when drugs go through a process of being released or licensed, there is standardized data sets which are sent to the medical regulators, such as the MHRA or the FDA or the EMA, depending where you are. The data that should be released is standardized and should be looked at in a particularly standardized way. There are always allegations that some pharmaceutical companies game the system. That may or may not be true. I'm sure it's been true in certain situations. More often than that, I would suspect there's just so much data that people don't get on top of all of the data. And if you slice the data in a particular way, you can find certain things, right? So I don't know if it was a standard way of looking at, side effects by age group, by side effect type. Does that make sense? Because that's how you would get this data, right? If you haven't looked at it by age group, you won't find it because they'll be there, but it's not necessarily known.
But
so, yeah.
How do you get permission to roll out a drug for, let's say, everything but pregnant women? Because that's usually the. You can go back to that story. So, pregnant women, aren't allowed any medication practically. You can roll it out without having the data on what it does to different development areas, brains in different development stages. Because the brain, I believe, up until about 24, isn't it, is still developing, and there's certain in teenagerness it goes through certain stages. Surely,
no. I mean, they will have. No, I'm sure they will have tested it. But if they've analyzed the data in that particular way to see whether this association exists or not, is a different question. Does that make sense?
Well, I hear it, but
it's about how you slice the pie. Because if you are looking at people from 18 to 60, so I don't know anything about these studies or how they were conducted. If you're looking at people from 18 to 65, it might not be statistically significant.
I'll tell you what, I'll tell you what, I'll let you go away and have a look at it. I'll look at it too, and we'll come back. Okay. We'll come back and look at it. But I'll tell you one thing I do know about having studied businesses, sectors for a long time. They're all corrupt. The nature of capitalism is. The nature of our form of economy and other forms of economy have their own different forms of corruption. But the nature of this one that we're sitting in is people work their way around the problem in order to make money. It doesn't matter if they're selling shoes, if they're selling missiles, if they're selling pharmaceuticals. It doesn't seem to matter. It's just the common story. Everyone's at it. There's a load of sharks out there, and once a company gets big, they're really shark-like, and then they might bring in a whole load of. I've worked for some of these companies. They seem to be bringing it all in, but they know the damage they're already causing. So it's. But
I'm going to leave you with, I suppose, the question that it kind of underlines this dilemma for me, right? Yeah, and I think we've had a great conversation today. Fluoxetine, and I'm just going to use this particular medication. This is a drug that is probably the first drug that I realized in psychiatry that works. When I was a psychiatric trainee, you have this thing in the back of your mind that, I don't know, are these conditions all made up? This is when I was very junior. And do medications really work? Fluoxetine works. I've seen it. I've seen it actually save lives, right? Now, what you're telling me is that you know a case where it that didn't work out so well, and certainly I know that some of these medications can cause suicidal ideas, right? And so the question for me is, in all this morass, in all this mess, how do I take you with me if you're my patient and try and come to some understanding together that benefits you? Because if there's a medication that works and it can help sort out your profound depression, your feelings of despair, your feelings of suicidal thoughts and ideas, but there are some side effects, but I don't know them completely.
I mean, and this is my problem with psychiatry.
Yeah.
This is why I tell
Sure.
you what, if a heart surgeon told me to take something, I'd probably take it. But when it comes to psychiatry, I'd think 5-10 times. I think there's an enormous problem with the full out scale of prescribing SSRIs, because one, it leads to a dependence. So
Sure.
it's the perfect drug. It's a drug for life. There's two perfect drugs: the drug for life, where you have to take it every day, and the mass rollout. Everyone's got to take it at least once. These are the money making drugs in the world. Everything else doesn't make nearly as much, if anything at all. But those are the ones you're looking for as a drug company. And the thing about them is they bring in dependency amongst people I know, and they're hard to get off. And the other thing is, what about life? Is it just a chemical imbalance, or is it actually something in society is so out of tune that we can't deal with these moods?
Let's. I think we'll have to do another podcast, right? Okay, but dependence, I'm not sure about that. Withdrawal effects, I agree with you. They're overprescribed. I agree with you. They work. They're effective. They're safe.
But hang on.
Yeah.
If something's hard to withdraw from, doesn't that make it dependent?
Not necessarily. You can people can get off these medications. Dependency means what? Are you talking about
they're
psychological?
Hard to get. Well, if they're hard to, okay, it's very hard to stop taking it. Let's put it that way.
Sure. So those are discontinuation symptoms. I agree with that. There are various ways to look at the question. If you're going to talk about dependence, you're also talking about craving, a psychological need, all of these kind of things.
Okay,
they're not necessarily
let's just
the
say
case,
it's very hard not to take it.
But people do come off it.
I think people come off crystal meth. They come off heroin. But I mean, it doesn't stop them being quite hard to come off. Whatever word we want to use it, people can't come off their phones. People can't come off making money. We seem to be in. I think we
need to. I think we certainly need to get people off them. I think there's too many people who are left on them. The resource isn't there. Yeah, the resource isn't there to help people come off medication. The resource is there to help people get onto medication. There's probably a pharmaceutical incentive for that in terms of medical messaging and all of these kind of things. There's also something about what's called defensive medicine. If you're taking 40 milligrams of fluoxetine and you're stable, and I'm the GP seeing you, and I know that if I take you down to 30, there's a risk of your suicidal thoughts worsening, for example, why would I do it? It's just easier to leave you till next time, right? But yeah, I think we've had a bit long conversation about the nature of science today. SSRIs and side effects. I think we're going to have to leave that for another podcast. I don't want any of my patients not to think that these aren't transformational, wonderful drugs. There are problems. I'm happy to talk about them, but we can't just.
No, I know that's what I do like. Yeah. I mean, that's what I like about you. I know if I was your patient, I'd trust you because you're trying to have the conversation and look at the whole pattern. I'm just saying, as a person looking out into the world, I think there's a problem with these things, and I think they are probably stopping a worse problem. But I think the problem might not just be chemical. I think it's societal.
We've got to come back to this, Jonathan.
Yeah. I think it's quite a big issue.
But I'm not your priest.
Definitely not. I don't think I have one.
All right. Thank you very much.
See you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.